Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. When you're not sure how to open an episode with your own words, and that's because there's too many to say, not too few that come to mind, you just borrow someone else's. So this is how one Indiana entrepreneur described today's guest a few years ago. Quote, "Scott, when he gets a vision, it is so clear, so direct. I don't think that can be taught. It is amazing to watch it happen. I consider myself a hard worker, but I've never seen anybody in my entire career that has a motor like Scott. He doesn't expect the same work ethic from you, but he pulls you along. Eventually, you will start working that hard, or you will get left behind, and you don't want that to happen." End quote. So with roles at Software Artistry-ExactTarget-Salesforce among those in his background, we're pleased to welcome today the founder and leader of Met-aCX, Scott McCorkle. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Tom, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
We appreciate it. So I'm going to throw you for a loop right off the bat. You know, most people listening to this are probably aware of your career and different stops, and maybe a few others aren't. So many accomplishments, so many big days. What's the best day you've ever had in the business world?
Oh boy, let me think.
Usually build up to those kind of things, but I figure, you can handle it. I'll throw one tough one at you right off the bat.
There's two categories of things that come to mind here. The first is more businessy, and it's the first time that I ever stepped foot in New York City on a business trip. And the Twin Towers were still there, and thinking, oh my gosh, I've made it. Here I am in Lower Manhattan for a work meeting, and that felt really special. And New York has a special place when one thinks of business and commerce, and ExactTarget being in a digital marketing world, the advertising capital of the world. And I can remember with ExactTarget, right after we were public, it wasn't the IPO, but it was several months later. One of the cool things about the New York Stock Exchange versus the NASDAQ is the actual physical building. And that's available to companies that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So we had an amazing customer event right on the floor of the stock exchange, and that was a pretty special day too. And it kind of
special lure of New York, as you said, and so whether the city might have its ups and downs, but it's still quite a special place.
It is, yes, it is.
So Scott, about 4 years ago, we had the chance to talk quite a few times when the Chamber honored you as our dynamic leader of the year. And one of the things that stood out was you told me how at that point you had a conversation with a customer every single day. I would say every day. And at that it started at that point more than 20 years earlier. So I'm guessing if you did it for 20 years, you're probably still doing it today. But the question, why is that so important? Why is that so valuable to you?
Oh, there's two parts to this, Tom. Going back in time, I was in product roles, development roles. It wasn't customer facing. But I wanted to understand what the customers saw about the product that I was building that they liked or didn't like. And I had an opportunity to have a couple interactions like that. And I found that being able to represent that voice of the customer back into a product company really translated into influence. I was able to say things and influence things in a positive way. And that just felt good for my career. So I said to myself, I'm not in a customer-facing role, but I'm going to find a way to talk to a customer routinely at first. What happened then, as that continued to grow, there was a sort of a parallel philosophy here of just trying to get one more thing done on the increment. That you have plans, you set deadlines, you're trying to work toward goals. And if you could just get one more thing done, that had a tendency to add up. One more feature, one more phone call, one more email. So I applied that to the idea of talking to a customer then every day. I would just make sure a day didn't end unless that happened. And it would often be easy, especially as my career advanced, but there would be a Friday afternoon, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I hadn't talked to a customer yet. And, honestly, I didn't really want to. I was tired and, maybe it was a tough week, but I would reach out. Typically, in that context to someone that I already had a relationship with, an email didn't count. Tom, this is like connecting,
Sure.
having a conversation. And there would be so many times that I would have that interaction that could have not happened, and I would discover something important. It could be something urgent actually happening that was on this person's mind that I was able to find out about earlier. It could be a conversation that just led to some idea, or it could just be another step in relationship building that started to form really firmer relationships with customers that allowed me, person to person, to be able to just have a deeper relationship with these people. So that just really then solidified this idea. If I tell myself I'm going to do that every day and do it, there will be good things that come from that otherwise wouldn't. And that will help the companies I'm involved with. So that's something I've done for a long time.
I bet some of those Friday afternoon conversations actually probably proved to be the most beneficial. I'm sure that all of them helpful, all of them important, but you probably learned things at 4:30 Friday that were helpful for many years.
There's no question. It's just really, really amazing. And that whole notion of trying to get one more thing done on the increment, I think is good advice generally.
Well, let's talk MetaCX. For me, seeing you today in our conversation, you got the MetaCX hat on. Talk a little bit about the company, where you're at currently, and some of the challenges that you help both buyers and sellers of software solve.
Yes, it's a lot of thought experiments as we started the company about enterprise software and innovation. We could say to ourselves that there's more digital transformation yet to happen than has happened. But if we step into that, what will that look like? How can we start to really shape it and think of a way to build a software company that really steps into this future, that doesn't do things the way we've done in the past? So with that thinking, it became clear to us this notion that we've all been building software for a business to use for its processes or workflows. Yes, we have technology that exposes itself to customers, or we can send emails or Slack, we have websites. But if you think about enterprise software, systems of record, workflow-oriented systems, unquestionably the mindset for those products is a company that has some problem to solve that uses the software to solve the problem. Yet here we are in a world of digital transformation where we're all collaborating and interacting more. What would it look like for businesses to do that? If businesses were to have some more digital interaction than they have today, what might shape that? That question led us down the path that was, businesses come together for the purpose of defining expected value that needs to be delivered from the relationship, and then measuring or determining and ensuring that value actually is delivered. That's the whole nature of a relationship between a supplier and buyer. So with that thought experiment, we started MetaCX to say, let's build something that's not customer relationship management just for a supplier. It's not vendor management for a buyer, but really a value framework where suppliers and buyers are equal. They are much more in a network than they are using individual instances of enterprise software. And in the MetaCX network, they're able to co-create these digital spaces that establish the expectation of why they're supplier or buyer. So we think that speaks much more to the real essence of what it means to manage a relationship in a business setting. And Tom, it's still early, but we're very encouraged that we're onto something here, that we actually have a framework and platform that's going to make a mark in the industry. So we're very encouraged.
Scott, each company obviously is different, but if you can compare MetaCX maybe to some of the other entrepreneurial efforts that you've been involved with or that you've been aware of, are there certain differences? I mean, one example, certainly I know I was happy to be present a few years ago when you announced, you'd raised $14 million while in stealth mode, while still in development. And as you said, it's still early, but are there comparisons, differences in MetaCX compared to other startups?
Yeah, great question. And Tom, I can maybe give a little fun inside news here for your listeners. We've raised another 7.5 million that we haven't announced.
Excellent.
We'll announce that coming up here into the summer when we expect some additional capital that we'll be announcing. And I think maybe that's the place to start with your answer. I mean, this is an ambitious vision that we have. It has been capital intensive to build it. Whatever the opposite of bootstrapping is the approach we're taking here. And that's risky. We've got to make sure that the actual fundamentals of the company, the financial metrics that we need to be able to show for revenue growth and customer acquisition, those need to catch up with the capital that we're raising. So I would say the difference here perhaps is taking a bit of a bigger swing, accepting more risk here on the outset, starting the company in anticipation that our experience and the early validation of our idea is right. If it's not, we got to quickly adjust. But we just really want to make a company that isn't just incrementally innovating, but makes for a fundamental contribution to the world of software.
Well, when we talk about software companies and software as a service, I don't think there's anybody probably in the country or maybe the world cranking them out like Indianapolis's own High Alpha. You've been obviously associated with that and many of your former ExactTarget and other colleagues. Can you let listeners in just a little bit on, well, what's the secret sauce there? What makes High Alpha so successful in creating these new companies at such a rapid and successful pace?
Tom, it really is extraordinary. I don't have the exact number at the top of my mind here, but let's say 20 companies created from scratch over the last several years.
And no slowing down during a pandemic either.
It actually sped up. It's incredible. Yeah, it actually created a record number of companies this past year. 6 or so were announced, and there are more yet unannounced. And we'll see those companies, by the way, over the next several years. Not everything works, but a lot of them will. And you'll start to see those Series A, Series B, Series C funding events that start to really amplify the innovation lens and just the country being able to see what's happening here, even to a higher degree. And of course, we've had a couple acquisitions over the last month, some of these companies as well by very well-established, well-known companies. So I would say the secret sauce started with building a structure and a process that aired towards starting a company. There are 100 reasons not to start something, and you can quickly talk yourself out of moving forward because of incomplete information, ambiguity. And what High Alpha said is, we're going to start these companies. We're going to run a process where we enter a week, they call them sprint weeks, with 4 to 6 ideas. And at the end of that week, we're starting a company. And if we like more than one idea, we're going to start more than one company. And that propensity for action, that we're a venture studio and our whole existence is to start companies. So we're going to build a process that forces us to start companies. And I think that focused vision, that moving to action in the face of ambiguity, you figure it out as you go. Then you get these things in motion. When something's in motion, you can actually shape it and change it. If it's just sitting static as some idea in your head, you can't do anything with it. So I think they had just a very insightful vision from the beginning of how they're going to start companies, and they sure have done it.
So Scott, would part that explains the kind of the number of startups. Would part 2 of that equation be the talent? And by that, I mean the talent that has come from the ExactTargets and the Salesforce and some of the other companies. It seems like we're maybe reaching that point where there's more talent than ever, leadership talent, to be able to guide these new companies. Yeah,
for sure. Tom, we were, go back a decade, a relatively small technology market. I mean, that's okay. It's like, this really, in my mind, isn't a contest about measuring size. It's about contributing at a level that is regarded as the best in class at innovation. So are we part of the innovation economy at that level? And the answer is yes. But as a relatively small market, when you have an ExactTarget, Angie's List, Interactive Intelligence, Aprimo, 4 companies that really establish some critical mass, they tend to sort of create a lot of gravity for the resources and talent to come into, and they kind of end up at the places where they're sort of scooping up the talent. Those companies then all have exits within the same general time frame. 100%, you now have all this talent that some stay with the acquiring company and have great careers and continue to grow. Others use it as an opportunity to say, I want a next chapter. And I think I've learned a lot. I have some ideas. I have increased confidence. Maybe I even have a little capital of my own from the equity that came from those exits. I'm going to go start a company, or I'm going to step into a founding team. So that cycle is very, very real. And we're going to see it play out again over the next decade, even more so, because you've just got that stronger foundation to begin with. And of course, we can trace a lot of things back to software artistry. You mentioned them, the first publicly traded company, software company in Indiana. And, a dozen companies came out of software artistry, including Interactive Intelligence.
Scott, one other part of the equation, obviously, is money, venture capital. I've written so many stories over the years and had so many conversations about the lack of venture capital. Anecdotally, we seem to be seeing a lot of national VC firms either establishing Indiana operations or certainly paying more attention here. But we still rank, in the 30s. And when the chamber looks at it through our report card of venture capital raised, and often a talk of a lack of funding at certain stages. What's your kind of capsule of where we're at on the VC front in 2021?
I think we will see that ranking increase to the better as this next wave of startup companies really begin to reach more mature phases. So I think the future looks good for there to be positive growth. And I think that there's really 2 ways to look at it. If you have started a company in our market and it is a good idea, you're going to get funded. There are local sources that are aggressively funding companies. You've got VCs like the Atlanta-based BIP, now rebranded Panoramic, that does Midwest investing, Hyde Park in Chicago, Rise of the Rest, and many, many others. Drive Capital in Columbus, the High Alpha, Alos, Elevate, all the folks here, based out of Indy. So, but that said, on the increment, kind of that idea again, would more companies be funded that maybe weren't so obviously fundable if there were more local sources of funding? Maybe. And I think all of this, I look at the trends and say, is it getting better or worse? I think it's clearly getting better. So I'm pretty optimistic, Tom, with that. And I think we'll see Indiana recognized as an innovation center, which is really the most important thing. I think more than
is it maybe a fact that we've been too impatient in this? Just think of it. It's technology people, it's entrepreneurs, it's innovators who want to make things happen quickly, and that's part of their makeup. But when we look at this, it's such a long range story to eventually become that technology innovation hotbed.
These the cycle of a company to make, and as I say this, there are all kinds of exceptions and variability. But even as I worked up the emotional strength to start Met-aCX, and it is very emotional thing. It's telling yourself, you've just laid out your path for the next decade. That it's going to be 10 years that you're going to have to put into this thing amongst much uncertainty to get it to work. So yeah, these things should be measured in decades, not years. And along the way, I think we need to look at the signals that tell us that the right things are happening that will create innovation over that kind of cycle. And the evidence to me seems clear.
Yeah. Okay. You brought it up. You brought up mental strengths. I'm going to ask you about when you left Salesforce in 2016, and we talked about this the following year, kind of your hiatus, so to speak. Maybe it was shorter than maybe you anticipated because you were back at it pretty quickly. But talk about the value of that, what that allowed you to do, and how that kind of re-energized you, maybe fair to say.
It was my first professional break. It was a few months, I guess, is what it turned out to be. And I found it very, very, very refreshing. And you could find your mind freeing places to be able to have new ideas, to be, just different perspectives, a certain mindfulness. I think that experience I've applied back just to try to find those places, even now that I'm back into something. But it was just a really well-timed experience to have that kind of mental break. And I think that, but then what else are you going to do? It's the garage only needs so much cleaning, although it was good to clean the garage. This is just a personal thing with me more than sort of a pattern. I did begin to talk to a couple startups and help fund a couple and begin to work, even fairly operationally. And what's interesting, if you either are the CEO or you aren't, and you can advise a company, and that CEO will take or not take your advice. It's their company. They have to be able to factor it in. And I just felt like I didn't have the best outlet to apply the things I learned over the last 20 years, and I didn't have the right vehicle to be able to try things to see how that learning might make things work better. So it just became clear to me that I needed my own company to do that. So off I went then to think through these things that we spoke of a little bit earlier, what's happening in software and what might some fun developments in the future look like, and that there was MetaCX. But even now, I'm not on that break now, but I still benefit from it.
Yeah, I don't know if we can officially call it a hiatus, though. I think a hiatus has to be longer than that. You set a record for a short hiatus, maybe.
Yeah.
Scott, we talked about talent and leadership talent, but talk about talent for an organization like yours. It's ultra competitive world out there for technology talent. What are some things that you find that are keys to finding and keeping the people you need to allow MetaCX to continue to grow?
We sure do benefit from a terrific network of people we've worked with in the past. And ExactTarget has such a great culture. And while it was hard and challenging, the people that went through that together enjoyed that accomplishment that they all achieved together. And there are connections that come from that sure make hiring into that network something that does help us very much. But then you also don't want to just hire all that same network. You want a new culture to evolve, and we've purposely have hired outside of our network with just even some greenfield recruiting to expand, just the candidates and the pools of folks that we're bringing on board. And I think interesting problems, transparency, equity. You join MetaCX, everyone gets a piece of equity. The clarity of vision and purpose. People want to create things that are interesting and feel like they'll make a contribution. So we just really try to make everyone part of that process. Every single person at our company now is part of the founding team. We make that very explicit. 3 years from now, we can't say someone being hired as part of the founding team. Still important, still valuable, but that's a different phase. Right now, we are really close to the making it or breaking it or not making it. And everyone, we just acknowledge that. And the folks that are here, if they weren't, would lessen our chance of being successful. So just highlighting that if you want to start a company, here's something that you can join and be part of this founding team. And that's going to attract a lot of great folks that want that level of contribution.
Yeah, that's excellent. Scott, you've probably been asked this next question a million times, so I'll make it 1,000,001. But as you think about it, what's the number one piece of advice you would have for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, great. So, there's a number one piece of advice I would like when I'm asked generally about kind of business, and writing is always my answer, is just doing all you can to sharpen your writing skills. And
well, I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of that answer. I like that.
Yeah, it matters. If you can take abstract thoughts and put it into a well-constructed, well-written prose statement, bullet point, slide, email, it matters. It really does. And for kind of specifically entrepreneurs, it's that that balance between knowing that you have to solve problems or you've got a big problem, but you can't solve every problem, and you need to be comfortable operating with very, problems that would make the company seem, call its success into question. And that ambiguity, back to the emotional part of it, you need to be able to find a place for that. And if you go too hard at, oh my gosh, I have to not sleep until this problem's solved, you're just going to burn yourself out in a big way. Or if you just ignore the problem, it will eventually come back and really bite you. So you just have to find that balance of, yes, that's a problem. We will solve that. We don't know how right now. And we're just stepping into it to learn as much as we can, put things in motion, and just that bringing people along. Back to the team, you can't have everyone in a mode of panic or fear, but rather encouragement and helping with confidence, and just help everyone understand that, yes, we will get this solved. And I think just that process over time is really, really, really important.
So Scott, just like I started off asking you a question about your best day in business that normally would fall at the end, now that we're near the end of the conversation, I'm going to go back and say something I probably should have done at the beginning. So you're a native of the tiny town of Milroy in Rush County. I used to drive right by Milroy on my way to Ball State from my home. You went to Ball State, you earned your MBA from the IU Kelley School of Business. You've had all the many companies and affiliations here in Indiana. But I'm sure you had opportunities elsewhere and probably had some funders urging you maybe to grow companies somewhere else. Were you ever severely tempted to do so, or is it all Indiana all the time?
I like it here, Tom, and I have no plans of going anywhere else. And it's a terrific place to start a business, raise a family. And I've always traveled a lot. So when we were acquired into IBM, Software Artistry, that was 97. So it was later that year in 97, as part of IBM, that I made my first trip around the world. Took off to the east and landed from the west, and have done that many times and seen the world over. And it just strikes me that you can live wherever you want. So I might take a little credit here for that sort of insight way before we all had it during this terrible pandemic, that really equalized things. I think there's always been those of us that thought, well, I can just live wherever I want. I can just get on a plane when I need to be somewhere else. And then digital technologies are getting so much better. Can't we just all do that? I think what happened with the pandemic is it just made even folks that didn't want to do that or like that have to do it. So now we all did it, and it just became clear, I think much clearer to all of us, that you live where you want, which I think has huge implications, even from an Indiana economic development perspective. I think it makes place very important, investment and governmental policies that are business friendly, that people would want to be here because it enriches their whole life, not just because some company has a headquarters here. But I've enjoyed being part of this community. It's given me very much over my life here, and I just hope I can give it a little bit back.
Absolutely. Scott, last question we've asked everybody this year on the In Chamber. You can think about this professionally, personally, but at the end of the day, what's made it a great day for Scott McCorkle?
I had a doctor's appointment today where I went out and got a new pair of glasses on the way. So we're coming out of the pandemic and getting back to life as we know it.
So yeah, just getting back to the way things we were and we hope to be again. That is excellent.
Indeed.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for the time and sharing your insights with our listeners. And indeed, you said you hope that you give back. You certainly have given back and through many leadership roles. And I know the Indianapolis and the Indiana technology communities and beyond are much better for your many contributions. So thank you.
Well, Tom, that's very kind. Thank you for that. And thank you for all you've done. And it was a real pleasure talking to you today.
I appreciate it. And once again, thanks Scott McCorkle, founder and CEO of Met-aCX and one of our Indiana technology leaders. We encourage you to stay tuned. We are nearing the end of season 4 of the In Chamber, but we'll continue our conversations through July. Might be a short break after that, but I'm sure we'll be back with season 5 after that. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll return with our next episode in 2 weeks.